Assalamu alaikum, dear students. In this lecture we are going to study about generative grammar and its properties. Previously we have studied about morphology, what morphology is, and then we move towards the syntax, that what syntax is, and then generative grammar is the aspect of syntax. So let's begin towards the lecture. In this lecture we are going to study about universal grammar, universal syntactic features, generative grammar, and properties of the generative grammar. So what is the universal grammar? Before getting into the universal grammar, in 1960s, Noam Chomsky, a linguist, proposed the concept of universal grammar. As you might have studied before, the concept of mentalism and behaviorism. Like, mentalist proposed the concept that human beings have something innate in their mind, they have something previous knowledge in their mind that they used to acquire the knowledge. Like, only just because of imitation they do not learn the language, they have something already in their mind. That, for example, the word pen, a child learns to pronounce the word pen as a pen, but the sounds p, a, and n are already embedded in his mind. Whereas the behaviorist says that everything a child or a person learns is through the environment. There is no role of mind in learning a language. So Noam Chomsky is the person who actually proposed the concept of mentalism. So from mentalism, the concept of universal grammar came into existence. So what is the universal grammar? Here the word universal shows that something which is present throughout the world, something which is present in every person, everything. Grammar is related to the language, so every language has its grammar. English language has a different grammar, Urdu language has a different grammar, Chinese language, Arabic language, German, Persian, all languages have their grammar. So universal grammar basically means that particular things which are universal in a grammar. So let's see what the universal grammar is. According to him, means according to Chomsky, all languages of the world share some common characteristics. So all languages of the world have some common characteristics. Common characteristics means gives the universal word, have something universally in them. All languages have universal characters. Some of the characters are universal. Universal grammar theory suggests that every language has some of the same laws. We have studied before that syntax basically deals with the study of the structure of sentences, that we have certain syntactic rules of every language, and according to these rules every person make and utter sentences. For example, English language has different syntactic rules, Urdu language has different syntactic rules, but the universal grammar theory suggests that every language has some common rules, have some common laws of making the sentences. So let's see what are these. Let's just study the background. In the 1960s, linguists became interested in a new theory about grammar, or the laws of language. The theory was popularized by an American linguist named Noam Chomsky, who often focused on the effortless language learning of young children. That the theory was given by Noam Chomsky, who studied that how a young children acquires a language. We have studied before that Noam Chomsky gives the concept of mentalism, or we can say the mentalist concept, that human beings have something previously in their mind, they have a system in their mind they have the capacity to learn the things, not they learn just by imitation or just by listening to others. They have something in their mind, so they use that knowledge in order to learn the language. So the mind knowledge plus imitation makes a person to learn a language. So Chomsky did not believe that exposure to a language was enough for a young child to become efficient at understanding and producing a language. Concept of behaviorism. This is actually the concept of behaviorism, or we can say behaviorist, that a child only learns a language by exposure to a language. So for Chomsky, it is not enough that exposure to a language was enough for a child to become efficient at understanding and producing a language. So according to him, that is actually the mentalist approach, or we can say the mentalism. He believed that humans are born with an innate ability to learn languages. According to Chomsky's theory, the basic structures of language are already encoded in the human brain at birth. So this is actually the concept of Chomsky, that we have, all human beings have something innate in their mind, and by using that knowledge they learn the language, not only just by listening to others or by imitating to others. This universal grammar theory suggests that every language has some of the same laws. For example, every language has a way to ask a question or make something negative. In addition, every language has a way to identify gender or show that something happened in the past or present or in the future. So we know that every language, in every language, there are expressions to show a question. Like we have a structure to ask a question in the English language. Similarly, we can ask a question in the Urdu language as well. It is not the way that only in English language it is possible to ask a question, or only in the Urdu language it's possible to make something negative. No. In every language we can ask question, we can make something negative, or we can show gender. Male, female are present everywhere. So in Urdu speaking areas, there is a concept of male, female, gender differentiation. So the language is representation of these things is the same. So this is actually a universal feature, that every language shares some laws, some same laws for expression. If the basic grammar laws are the same for all languages, a child needs only to follow the particular set of rules that his peers follow. Peers means his people, his surrounding people, his community members follow in order to understand and produce their native language. In other words, his environment determines which language he will use, but he is born with the tools to learn any language effectively. So the basic grammar rules are the same for all languages. A child only needs to learn the particular syntactic rules of a particular language. For example, if a child has born in English speaking community, so we have previously studied that the subject, verb and object agreement is the syntactic rule for the English language only. Only the English language obeys this rule, that the subject comes first, then comes verbs, and then comes the object. So a child born in the English speaking community only needs to follow the syntactic rules that are applicable in the English language. Okay. Similarly, if a child get birth or born in the Urdu speaking community, so the subject verb object syntactic rule is not obligatory for him, because the Urdu language do not follow the subject verb object sentence structure. So this is all about the basic grammar rules that all people, all grammar, all languages share the same, some common rules. So what are basically the universal syntactic features? That every language has same syntactic structure. That is, every sentence in any language has two parts in common, noun phrase and verb phrase. Every language has two parts in common. In every language, every sentence has these two parts in common, a noun phrase and a verb phrase. How? Just look at the example. The beautiful girl is watching the TV. This is an English sentence. The beautiful girl is watching the TV. So, the beautiful girl, here is the noun phrase, and from where the verb starts. You have to see the sentence that from where the verb is actually starting. So, the beautiful girl is a noun phrase, and from is, auxiliary is, the verb is starting. So from is to the TV, it's the verb phrase. It's NP and VP. Every language has common NP and VP. Similarly, take the example of Urdu language. वो पानी पीता है. Here, वो पानी is a noun phrase and पीता है is a verb phrase. So every language has a noun phrase and a verb phrase. There is no language in a world that do not contains noun phrase and a verb phrase in a complete, well-formed sentence. So now coming towards what the generative grammar is. Chomsky gave the notion of well-formed sentences. The generative grammar accepted the notion of well-formed sentences and rejected the notion of ill-formed sentences. Previously, we have studied that syntactic rules. In syntax, we see what? We see that which sentences are well-formed, that means grammatically correct, or which sentences are ill-formed or not grammatically correct. So generative grammar sees that well-formed sentences are accepted in any language, whereas the ill-formed sentences are rejected. So it's actually a one notion of a generative grammar. According to the generative grammar, a person can make infinite well-formed, or we can say grammatical sentences. By the term generative, you are getting the idea that it means something generating, producing something, making something. So a person can make infinite, no limit of making well-formed sentences. Here the keyword is the well-formed. According to the generative grammar, a person can make infinite well-formed means grammatical sentences. Anyone has the capacity to generate the infinite sentences according to the defined syntactic rules of any particular language. Like, this is not the way that we can make infinite number of sentences ungrammatically. No. The generative grammar says that yes, okay, a person has the ability to generate infinite number of sentences, but which type of sentences? That are grammatically correct, that are well formed. So, see the example. So every language has the capacity to generate longer, well-formed sentences. The term generative here refers to the process of generating, that is developing. That we have studied that generative grammar states what? That every person, every human being in the world has the capacity, has the ability to form well-formed sentences. Like, it's, for example, if someone is from the English speaking community, he or she has the ability to generate longer or well-formed sentences of the English language. Or else if the person is from the Urdu speaking community. So a person can generate or make well-formed, grammatically correct Urdu sentences that are correct in the Urdu grammar. For example, the boat from the shop situated in the heart of the city with flowers is informative. It's a longer sentence. We can make more and more longer sentences. Let's just take an example. We have a sentence. First sentence, I do not like going. Okay. Second sentence, I have the ability to make, I do not make sentence longer. I can generate more and more grammatical sentences, well-formed sentences. I have the ability to generate the sentences that are grammatically correct. First is, I do not like going. Okay. If I want to generate more, I can say, I do not like going there. Third, I do not like his going there. Fourth, I do not like his going there in the evening. Fifth, I do not like his going there in the evening on my car. Sixth, I do not like his going there in the evening on my car to the party. Seventh, I do not like his going there in the evening on my car to the party at the restaurant. So, have you seen that how from a single sentence I have generated the longer sentences, but all the 7 sentences are grammatically correct. None of the sentence is violating the English syntactic structure, sentence structure, or the English syntactic rules of making the sentences. So in this way, every person belonging to any language can generate infinite number of sentences that are grammatically correct. According to Chomsky, every person can generate infinite well-formed sentences in any language. So this is the main concept of generative grammar. What is the main concept of generative grammar? Through generative, that every person can generate infinite well-formed. Here, well-formed is the key word. That generating infinite sentences means producing grammatical sentences, not that we can speak or we can write many sentences ungrammatically. So well-formed is a condition that we have. Every person can produce well-formed, means grammatical sentences. So some of the properties of generative grammar are, the first one is creativity. It is the main principle of the generative grammar. A person can make or create many sentences that he has never heard before. Everyone can utter the already heard sentences or can make novel sentences. This remarkable property is referred to as creativity. That is, people can generate many new sentences on their own. That is, people can generate sentences, many new sentences on their own. So the property of a generative grammar first is creativity. Creativity means the ability, the capability of a person to generate new sentences. For example, there are many times where we can utter the sentences we have already heard, but in most of the situation we create sentences that we have never heard before. For example, if I have seen a tree, I may say the very beautiful tree, or I can start creating a story about that tree. So any person has the ability to create, to utter the novel, to make new sentences. So this is actually referred to as the creativity. And any native speaker, here native means a person whose mother tongue whose first language is that language. For example, if my first language is Punjabi, so I am the native speaker of Punjabi. Or if I was born in English speaking community, my first language or my mother tongue would be English, so my language would be English language. So any native speaker is capable of understanding and making new sentences. For example, if my first language is, I am a native speaker of Punjabi language, or I am the native speaker of English language, I have the capability, I have the ability, I have the creativity of understanding and making new sentences. No one can come and tell me that, okay, in this situation you have to speak this, or in this situation you have to write this. I am the only one who make new sentences. This is my ability, this is my creativity. So this is the concept of creativity of the generative grammar. This shows that language can not only be learned by simply imitation, rather some principles are in our mind. So we have studied previously that Noam Chomsky worked on what Noam Chomsky said that something is in our mind which is actually giving us information, which is actually making us eligible of producing new sentences. For example, we cannot just say or utter words that we only listen. We create new sentences. We speak new sentences according to different situations in our lives. So something is in our mind, we just only learn the rules of that language. For example, if I am the English speaker, if I were the English speaker, I have learned that, okay, subject, verb and object. So this is the basic syntactic structure of the English language, sentence structure. So I have to make that sentence according to these rules. So now move towards the second property of the generative grammar. The second property of the generative grammar is recursion. Recursion means repetition. Every natural language has the ability to generate longer sentences and repetitions in the sentences. Every language has the ability. This is the generative grammar is the universal feature, and in every language, every person has the creativity to create novel sentences in his or her language. So recursion or repetition, so every person has this ability. For example, if I am Urdu speaking, I have that ability. If I am English speaker, I have the ability of the recursion. I have that property. So what is the recursion or repetition we made in sentences? The repetition of the noun phrase in the sentence. We can repeat the noun phrases again and again in a sentence. This is our ability. For example, Jack saw Bill, and Mary saw Lisa, and Lisa saw Jack, and Bill saw both Mary and Lisa at the restaurant. So Jack saw Bill is a one noun phrase. Mary saw Lisa is another noun phrase. Lisa saw Jack is another noun phrase. So this is actually the repetition of the noun phrases. A person can repeat sentences. For example, if I am in the Urdu language, I can say Jack ne Bill ko dekha, or Mary ne Lisa ko dekha, Lisa ne Jack ko dekha, or Bill ne dono Mary और Lisa को देखा restaurant पर. So this is actually the recursion or repetition of feature, a universal feature which is present in every person. Next we have adjectival iteration, or we can say recursion, repetition, the repetition of the adjectives in the sentence. For example, in a sentence we can, before a noun, before one noun, we can add many adjectives before a noun. For example, the wonderful, long, informative, interesting English tale. So you have seen that how many adjectives we have added. Similarly, we can add more. We can repeat many adjectives before a single noun. So this is the property of a generative grammar that we can repeat many adjectives before a noun. Then thirdly, we have the PP attachment. PP here is the prepositional phrase attachment. We have studied before what is the prepositional phrase, a phrase which is working as a preposition in a sentence. The repetition of the prepositional phrase in a sentence. So see the example, the ball in the box, under the table, with the lamp is beautiful. So how many prepositional phrases we have added? In the box, 1, under the table, 2, with the lamp, 3. So we have repeated 3 prepositional phrases. So in this way, similarly, we can add more and more. We can generate more sentences which have the repetition of the prepositional phrases. So this is actually the property of the generative grammar. So first property was the creativity, the second property was the recursion. So where we can repeat the elements in a sentence, we have studied the noun phrase repetition, we have studied the adjectives repetition, we have studied the prepositional phrase repetition in a sentence. So now the third property of the generative grammar is competence. Competence. Noam Chomsky defined competence as the underlying knowledge of each speaker or hearer has about the language of his or her community. It is hypothesized as a psychological or mental property or function and therefore cannot be directly observed. In contrast, performance refers to an actual communicative act of speaking or hearing. So what is the competence? So Noam Chomsky previously gave the concept of competence and performance. What is competence? Competence is actually the knowledge, the ability we have in our mind. We have some knowledge in our mind about the language, and performance is what actually we speak. For example, if I were born in the English-speaking community, I have some knowledge in my mind that, okay, I have to make these type of sentences, and what I actually speak by using the knowledge of my mind, by using the competence, is the performance. So generative grammar states that every human being has the competence of language. Every human being has something previously underlying knowledge of their language, so they perform the sentences, they utter the sentences. So generative grammar is the aspect of a universal grammar. Okay, generative grammar that universally every person can generate longer, or we can say well-formed sentences. The creativity is a universal feature. Everyone has the creativity and the capability of making well-formed sentences. Recursion, everyone has the ability in every language. It's not like the case in only English language. We can repeat the sentences, we can repeat the words in a sentence. In Urdu language we can repeat as well, in Arabic, in Persian. So it's a universal feature. Similarly, we have studied competence. Competence is the same universal feature. That competence in generative grammar states that we have something underlying knowledge in our mind about our community, so do we perform, we speak according to that underlying knowledge. So this is actually basically the competence. For example, John put the car. Okay. Competence is the underlying concept which a person has in his mind that a sentence must give complete information. So if any English speaking person listens, John put the car, so he has a question arises in a native speaker's. Here the word is a native speaker, that only the native speaker has the competence of their language in their mind. So a question arises in a native speaker's mind that where does John put the car? John put the car is not giving up complete information. We are not the people belonging to English community, so we can say John put the car is a sentence. Okay, John put the car is a sentence, is a complete sentence. No issue in the sentence. But a native speaker who has the underlying knowledge of their language in their mind, they have a question that it's not giving a proper information. Something is missing in a sentence. Then where does the John put the car? So an adverb is actually required. John put the car where? John put the car in the garage. So a native speaker picks the sentence at first that this sentence is grammatically okay, but it's not conveying the meaning. So this is actually the competence, that the underlying concept, the underlying knowledge we have in our mind about our language. Okay, I drink water. It's a well-formed sentence. Okay, water drinks me. It's also a well-formed sentence. It's grammatical sentence, but it's conceptually wrong. Water cannot drink anything. So being we are not the native speakers of English language, we can say that water drinks me. Okay, it's a grammatical correct sentence, but the native speaker gets that no, it's not a right sentence, it's conceptually wrong. How does a water drinks a person? So this is actually the competence, this is actually the knowledge we have in our mind about any language, that what do we have to speak and what do we have not to speak. Book reads he, not obeying syntactic sentence structure rule, so it's a wrong sentence. So a person can say that its sentence is wrong because it's not obeying the syntactic structure, the syntactic sentence structure rule. So this is all with the today's lecture. What we have studied the Chomsky's concept of universal grammar, which is based on his concept of mentalism, that how he differs from the concept of behaviorism. Then we have studied the generative grammar, what the generative grammar is. Then we have studied the properties of generative grammar. These properties are present universally in every person. So these are the references. You can take guide from these references as well. Thank you. Allah Hafiz.